On March 12, 2025, deep beneath the streets of Berlin, a heavy steel door that had been sealed for 32 years groaned open for the first time since reunification. Inside, engineers found something most Americans would find impossible to believe. A fully stocked Cold War bunker, complete with air filtration systems, medical supplies, and enough space to shelter 800 citizens during a nuclear attack. The door was being reopened not for a museum tour, but for active duty. Germany was bringing its bunkers back online. We think preparedness is about military strength. Aircraft carriers, fighter jets, nuclear arsenals. We measure power in megatons and missile ranges. But Germany's quiet resurrection of its civil defense network reveals a darker truth. When the bombs fall, when the cyberattacks cripple your grid, when the missiles strike your cities, your military means nothing if your civilians have nowhere to hide. Nations don't just lose wars on battlefields. They lose them in the chaos that follows, when millions of terrified citizens realize their government built weapons, but forgot to build shelters. Germany learned this lesson once. America is about to learn it again. The illusion begins with how we remember the Cold War. We picture Reagan at the Brandenburg Gate, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the collapse of Soviet communism. We see it as an ideological victory, democracy over tyranny. Basement entrances and apartment blocks that lead to reinforced chambers. Underground parking garages with walls thick enough to stop a blast wave. At its peak, West Germany maintained shelter space for nearly 93% of its population. Think about that number, 93%. While America built missiles, Germany built survival. The German system wasn't just about concrete and steel. It was about a national contract written in the language of preparedness. Every new building over a certain size required a shelter or a payment into a fund that built communal bunkers. Families kept emergency supplies as a matter of law, not suggestion. Children practiced drills not once a year, but monthly. The message was clear and brutal. Your government will defend you, but you must be ready to defend yourself. This wasn't paranoia. This was accounting for risk. But then 1989 changed everything. The wall fell, the Soviet threat evaporated, and the entire apparatus of civil defense became an embarrassment, a relic of a fearful age. Between 1990 and 2007, Germany systematically decommissioned its bunker network. The orange triangle signs were painted over. The supplies were sold off or left to rot. It seemed rational at the time. The threat was gone. The money could be spent elsewhere. The Bundeswehr could focus on peacekeeping missions, not preparing for Armageddon. The risk seemed theoretical. Then came February 24, 2022. Russian tanks crossed into. Ukraine and Europe woke up to a reality it had spent 3 decades trying to forget. Proximity matters. Geography is not optional. And the weapons designed to destroy cities don't care about your economic growth rate or your diplomatic initiatives. Within 6 months of the invasion, German officials were quietly surveying the old bunkers, testing structural integrity, calculating capacity. By 2024, the Federal Office for Civil Protection had received authorization to spend billions restoring the network. The timeline was aggressive. Full operational capacity by 2029. This wasn't a drill anymore. This was Vorsorge. Precaution. The recognition that the cost of being wrong once exceeds the cost of being prepared forever. The new German strategy reveals something Americans struggle to understand: the chaos window. the period when communication networks are down, when emergency services are overwhelmed, when panic kills more people than the initial attack. German engineers now focus on three specific functions: blast protection, air filtration, and communication redundancy. The goal isn't to hide families for months. It's to keep them alive long enough for the dust to settle, for radiation to disperse, for authorities to establish control. Airlocks that create positive pressure zones. Filtration systems that scrub chemical agents, biological contaminants, and radioactive particles. Independent power generation. Water reserves calculated by person hours. Medical stations stocked for trauma and radiation exposure. These aren't luxury accommodations. They're engineered survival pods designed by people who understand that civilization is fragile and protection is measured in kilowatt hours and cubic meters of filtered air. Every detail is quantified. Every system has redundancy, because in the calculus of civil defense, there are no partial victories. But here's where the numbers get uncomfortable. Germany is spending approximately 7 billion euros to restore shelter capacity for roughly 10% of its population by 2029. That's a massive investment for limited coverage. The strategy relies on layered protection. Household preparedness forms the base layer. Every family is encouraged to maintain 10 days of supplies: water, food, medicine, batteries. The second layer is community shelters in schools, government buildings, and underground transit stations. The third layer is the hardened bunkers for critical personnel and high-risk zones. It's not perfect coverage. Contrast this with the United States. On any given day, fewer than 5% of Americans have more than 3 days of emergency supplies in their homes. There is no national shelter registry, no federal requirement for new construction to include blast protection, no unified civil defense drills. FEMA maintains strategic reserves and coordinates disaster response. But those systems are designed for hurricanes and earthquakes, not strategic attacks on infrastructure. The American civil defense apparatus, which once rivaled Germany's, was quietly dismantled between 1985 and 1994. Funding dried up. Sirens fell silent. The shelters were decommissioned or repurposed. The rationale was simple and seductive. We won the Cold War. The threat was over. The money could be better spent elsewhere. But the ledger tells a different story. Between 1950 and 1984, the United States spent approximately $42 billion in inflation-adjusted terms on civil defense infrastructure. Shelters, warning systems, supply stockpiles, public education programs. That investment created a psychological buffer. Americans believed their government had planned for the worst. That belief itself had strategic value. It reduced panic, maintained social cohesion, projected strength to adversaries. When the program was defunded, that buffer evaporated. By 2001, when the September 11th attacks occurred, the lack of coordinated civil defense became painfully obvious. Emergency communication systems failed to interoperate. Evacuation routes were chaotic. There was no muscle memory for large-scale crisis response because the muscle had atrophied. The economic trap America walked into wasn't debt or inflation. It was the trap of assumed safety. The belief that geographic distance equals immunity, that oceans provide protection, that advanced military technology makes civil defense obsolete. This is the same delusion that cost empires their survival throughout history. The Romans believed their walls were impregnable until they weren't. The French believed the Maginot Line made invasion impossible. The British believed naval supremacy guaranteed security. Every time the assumption proved fatal, not because the threat was unpredictable, but because the cost of protection seemed too high until the moment it became priceless. Consider the math of vulnerability. A single electromagnetic pulse attack over the central United States could disable the power grid for months. Hospital generators would run for days, maybe a week. Water treatment plants would fail within 48 hours. Supply chains would collapse immediately. The economic damage would exceed $2 trillion. The death toll from secondary effects, starvation, disease, exposure, could reach millions within the first 90 days. And yet, the United States has no hardened civilian shelters capable of protecting populations during the initial event. No distributed supply caches. No standardized communication protocols that function without cellular networks. The gap between threat and preparation isn't just large. It's civilizational. Germany's approach offers a brutal comparison. When German officials war-gamed a strategic crisis scenario in 2023, they calculated that their restored bunker network, combined with household preparedness, could reduce civilian casualties by approximately 60% in the critical first week. 60%. That's not a perfect score. It's triage. But it's the difference between controlled crisis and societal collapse. The German model accepts that not everyone survives, but it refuses to accept that no one is protected. That distinction matters when you're trying to maintain the functions of government, preserve social order, and provide a foundation for recovery. The smoking gun moment for American civil defense came not with a treaty or a document, but with a budget reconciliation bill in 1994. Buried in the appropriations language was the effective termination of federal civil defense programs. The Federal Emergency Management Agency was redirected entirely toward natural disaster response. State and local governments were told civil defense was now their responsibility, but no funding mechanism was provided. The result was predictable. Without federal coordination or resources, local programs withered. By 2000, fewer than 12 states maintained any civil defense infrastructure beyond basic emergency management. The institutional knowledge evaporated. A generation of emergency planners grew up without training in strategic threats. The muscle memory was gone. Now the bill is coming due. Since 2022, as European nations have raced to restore civil defense capabilities, American officials have largely remained silent. There have been no major federal initiatives, no public education campaigns, no infrastructure investments. The disconnect is staggering. The United States maintains approximately 11 aircraft carrier strike groups at a cost of over $100 billion annually. It fields the world's most advanced military technology. It spends more on defense than the next 10 nations combined. And yet a single hypersonic missile strike on a major city would find millions of civilians with no protected space, no emergency supplies, and no coordinated response plan. That's not a defense strategy. That's a catastrophic single point of failure. Let that number sink in. The German bunker restoration program costs approximately 7 billion euros over 5 years. The United States Navy's newest aircraft carrier, the USS Gerald R. Ford, cost $13 billion. One carrier. For the price of a single capital ship, America could theoretically began restoring civil defense infrastructure for its 50 largest cities: shelters, communication systems, supply caches, training programs. The economic trade-off is stark. Aircraft carriers project power abroad. Bunkers protect power at home. Germany has decided that in an era of precision long-range missiles and cyber warfare, the latter matters more. America has not yet reached that conclusion. The descent into vulnerability followed a predictable pattern. First came the budget cuts. Civil defense funding dropped from billions to millions between 1990 and 2000. Then came the institutional decay. Agencies were reorganized, expertise was lost, programs were merged into generic emergency management structures. Next came the cultural shift. Civil defense became associated with Cold War paranoia, prepper extremism, and dystopian fantasy rather than responsible governance. Finally came the technological obsolescence. The few remaining shelter systems were never upgraded for modern threats. No EMP hardening, no cyber-secure communications, no integration with digital alert systems. By 2020, American civil defense infrastructure wasn't just underfunded, it was archaeologically outdated. The antagonist in this story isn't a foreign power. It's the spreadsheet. The cost-benefit analysis that concludes protection isn't worth the investment because the probability of catastrophic attack remains low. This is the same logic that led New Orleans to underinvest in levee maintenance before Hurricane Katrina. The same thinking that left pandemic response stockpiles depleted before COVID-19. The same calculus that has failed repeatedly throughout history because it treats low probability, high consequence events as negligible until they occur. Germany's bunker program represents the opposite philosophy, the acknowledgement that certain risks, however remote, carry consequences so severe that preparation is non-negotiable. It's insurance against extinction. The climax of this story hasn't happened yet, but the trajectory is clear. The next major geopolitical crisis involving a strategic attack on American soil will expose the civil defense gap in real time. There will be no shelters to evacuate to, no coordinated communication, no pre-positioned supplies. Emergency services will be overwhelmed within hours. Hospitals will exceed capacity. Power outages will cascade. And in the absence of official guidance and infrastructure, panic will fill the void. Social media will spread misinformation faster than authorities can correct it. Hoarding will empty stores within a day. Roads will clog with uncoordinated evacuations. The very systems designed to protect citizens, police, fire, medical, will struggle to function because they'll lack protected facilities and communication networks. This isn't speculation. It's what happens every time unprepared societies face sudden, large-scale crises. The generational aftermath of America's civil defense abandonment is only beginning to manifest. An entire generation of Americans has grown up without any concept of systematic preparedness. They don't know where shelters are because shelters don't exist. They've never participated in civil defense drills because those programs were canceled before they were born. When asked about emergency plans, most cite improvisation rather than preparation. This cultural shift has strategic implications. Nations with strong civil defense cultures, Israel, Switzerland, Finland, exhibit higher social resilience during crises. Their populations trust that institutions have planned for worst-case scenarios. That trust reduces panic and enables coordinated response. America is cultivating the opposite dynamic, a population conditioned to expect chaos, because chaos is what the infrastructure delivers. Germany will complete its bunker restoration program by 2029. That timeline isn't arbitrary. It's based on intelligence assessments about the evolution of regional threats and the window of vulnerability. By 2030, German officials project that key population centers will have functional shelter capacity, coordinated alert systems, and trained civil defense personnel. The network won't protect everyone, but it will protect the continuity of government, critical infrastructure personnel, and a significant civilian population. More importantly, it will demonstrate to adversaries that Germany has hardened its society against certain categories of attack, which itself serves as a deterrent. You're less likely to strike a target if you know the damage will be contained and the response will be coordinated. America's timeline is less clear because there is no comprehensive program. Individual states and cities have begun modest initiatives,